This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Mighty Arrow Family Foundation. To whom much is given, much is expected. This value guides the philosophy behind the Mighty Arrow Family Foundation today. Committed to its cause and infused with the entrepreneurial spirit, Mighty Arrow aims to invest in solutions that take action on climate change to build a more vibrant future, repair relationships from farm to market to table, heal our connection to the lands and waters we call home, and demand a more just and equitable society. To learn more about Mighty Arrow's forward-thinking, optimistic, and visionary work here in the American West and beyond, please visit www.mightyarrow.org. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Elliot Ross. Elliot is a photographer and writer whose work focuses on the intersection of landscape, identity, and justice in the American West. His images have appeared in Time, National Geographic, and the New York Times, and he's known for deeply researched, long-term projects that combine striking visual storytelling with the journalist rigor. Whether he's documenting water access on the Navajo Nation or tracing the contours of Glen Canyon as it reemerges, Elliot brings a rare mix of artistry, empathy, and precision to every assignment. Born in Taiwan and raised on the eastern plains of Colorado, Elliot grew up between cultures and landscapes, an experience that shaped both his worldview and his creative path. He picked up a camera early, inspired by his grandmother's family albums, and later earned a full ride to the Savannah College of Art and Design. After college, he cut his teeth in New York City, assisting some of the most high-profile portrait and fashion photographers in the industry. All the while, he was quietly dreaming about building a career on his own terms, one rooted in storytelling, purpose, and the landscapes he still called home. In this episode, we talk about the early experiences that shaped his artistic voice, the evolution of his career, and how he's learned to navigate the demands of both commercial and documentary work. Elliot shares the backstory of his recent Time magazine cover story on water equity in the West, a project that involved years of reporting, deep community ties, and even a return to the classroom. We also discuss his thoughts on creative endurance, working across political divides, and the role of photography in fostering empathy and connection. I'd encourage you to visit Elliot's website and dig deeper into all of his work, especially his project A Question of Balance, which became the Time magazine feature. You can find links to everything in the episode notes. Thanks so much to Elliot for the inspiring and timely conversation, and thank you for listening. Elliot, we're finally talking. We've had several really good phone chats, and I've really admired your work. And then as I was preparing for this, I generally block out a few hours just to dive deep into everybody's work that I'm talking to. And the more I dug, the deeper I went, and I just went down this amazing rabbit hole. And I've just been amazed at how much you've accomplished and how much you've done and how much you put out in the world. And so we got a lot to discuss. So I'll quit yapping. But the first thing I want to know, very simple question: where were you born?
Well, first off, Ed, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to dive in, and it's so exciting for me to be here and to have this conversation. I was born in Taipei, Taiwan.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And how did your parents end up over there?
My mother is originally from there. Yep. My father's from eastern Colorado, and my mom immigrated to the States just in time to start college. And the way I understand the story is that my dad and a couple of his friends, they were really interested in the East, in the Far East, and they started a Chinese club, and they were teaching themselves Chinese, and there were no Asians in Fort Collins, Colorado at the time at CSU. And one day my dad saw my mom walking across campus, and he was like, "Holy crap, there's an Asian person here. She's really cute." So they recruited her to the club, where she then became the secretary, and she was helping them on their English homework, because turns out her written English was better than theirs, along with their Chinese. And once my mom finished college, my dad had always wanted to live in Taiwan, and he convinced her to move back there. I know that wasn't her dream. She had just made it to the States, but they went back and they were there for quite a long time, almost 10 years. And they had me, I think, 6 years into moving back to Taiwan. And when I was around 4, we moved back to the States and then out to the eastern plains of Colorado, where my dad grew up with my grandparents.
What part of Colorado did he grow up in?
It's 22 miles northwest of a small town of 100 people called Peets, Colorado.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just south of the Nebraska border. In fact, our land abuts the Nebraska border. Kind of out there in the northeast corner of the state, out on the high plains.
That's super cool. Do you have any memories? I mean, what are your memories of being born over there? I mean, I know you moved this way when you were 4.5 or something, but like, do you have any memories of it?
I do, and they're pretty vivid. They're not very many memories, but what I do remember includes just like the buzzing sound of the Dryer's ice cream shop that we would go to once a week, and the checkered black and white floors, and just the only AC environment that I remember growing up over there. It's hot and humid. I remember getting chased by a bee in my favorite park. I remember the go-karts and how they would zoom around the track in that park, and how heartbroken I felt every weekend we were there because I wasn't big enough to drive those go-karts. And I loved cars. I mean, my mom, she still glows with surprise and admiration about how when I was 3, I could walk down the street and name off every make and model and maybe even the year of each car that we were passing. I was just such a car nut. I remember the typhoons and just the power of those storms and my friends. And I remember my babysitter. I had a good life over there, and then moving to eastern Colorado was quite a change.
So what was that like? I mean, what are your memories of that?
I remember, I quickly fell in love with my grandparents. My grandma especially, she was just so awesome and welcoming, and has been maybe the biggest influence in my life. But I also remember just kind of the culture shock of moving from Taipei and this vibrant city to a really rural lifestyle where, our closest neighbors were 4 or 5 miles away, and the mailbox was even 12 miles away. Just kind of out in the boonies, like an hour and a half from a grocery store. We'd go in once a week, go to after church, go to Walmart, get groceries, and and it was a very religious environment too. My whole dad's side of the family are very devout and evangelical Christians, and so that meant a lot of time in church, life centered around God and praying, and that was all new to me. And certainly I felt, especially in the beginning, kind of very much an outsider, and it was a hard transition, and that's when photography came into my life. I gravitated towards my grandma's point and shoot camera, and she was just such an incredible family documentarian, always taking pictures, and really good pictures too. I look back through the archives, and there's just some real framers in there, but just candids of our life, and kind of just these notes of a farm wife, really, wife of a preacher. My grandfather was a preacher too, and the camera became my shield in a way, something to hide behind, but still be present, and a tool to process everything and observe. And so pretty quickly, my grandmother got me a camera of my own when I was around 4.5, really in the early days of being out there. And man, that was transformative. It was awesome. I got, I did chores and everything, but we didn't get allowances or anything like that. But my reward was a roll of film a month developed with little prints. And so really it became my scavenger hunt each day, a picture a day, 36 exposures on a roll. So, one, if I was pushing it and feeling really greedy that day as a kid, 2 pictures, try not to blow it all in one day. But yeah, from a very early age, I think life has been easy for me in a way where I've always known photography was going to be the through line and was the thing that I wanted to do. And it's been a pretty single-minded pursuit since then.
I love that. And another thing about your childhood I picked up on in an article I read was that it sounds like books and reading were a big part of your childhood. And one of your favorite books is one of my all-time most important books, My Side of the Mountain. Can you talk a bit about any of the reading that may have influenced you as a kid?
Yeah, it was escapism, right? It was a window into a world outside of my own, a world that I craved. Growing up in that environment, we didn't have a whole lot of external, quote unquote, worldly influences. Mm-hmm. So really my windows were the books that my father would give me, like My Side of the Mountain, and National Geographic. That was really the one thing where I could see the outside world. And, that further just kind of reinforced that hunger for me to pursue a life of curiosity and exploration and meeting folks through the lens, because I saw that, other people were doing that. And really the other book that really kind of changed my life at an early age was one of Robert Adams, one of my favorite photographers to this day, huge influence. Adams at the time was one of the leaders of what is now known as the New Topographics movement, which was this kind of like revisionist way of looking at landscape photography in the West, where instead of celebrating its beauty and splendor, which it did, it was more, I guess, analyzing all the changes that humans were bringing upon the landscape and all the negative attributes that come along with that economic development and consumerism and the loss of these beautiful places. And Robert, he had photographed my great-grandmother, Edith Ross, at the family farm before I was born in the 80s. And, it's actually one of his more famous pictures too. And it's in that book. And that's why we had that book at my great-grandmother's house. And so that was my introduction to what I guess, quote unquote, real photography
sure.
is, and his writings. Later on, I started reading more of the text in the book, and just, he's such an excellent writer. He was an English teacher, and just his lessons on how to think about photography and how photography can change the world or make commentary in important places.
And was travel at all a part of your youth? I mean, I know that travel is one of the driving forces in everything. You love to travel, and you seem to go so deep when you do travel. I mean, were y'all able to do that, to travel around the West or anywhere in the United States, or were you pretty close to home most of the time?
I'd have to credit my dad. He's kind of the black sheep of the family, and didn't really fit in with the rest of the, I guess, ideology of growing up. Mm-hmm. And so it was because of him that I did get to travel, in the summers. After my parents split, he would come back for 6 weeks or so, and we would just go on these rambling, not always enjoyable quests across the West, looking for fossils and meteorites and arrowheads, and hanging out with his other rockhound buddies and staying in really crappy cockroach motels and crashing with random friends of his from the internet in their homes. And then also we would go sometimes here and there to further flung places, like been to Thailand a bunch looking for tektites, which are these
cool.
Glass nodules that fall back from the atmosphere after a meteorite impact. And imagine a meteorite slamming into the earth, into a sandier kind of silica based ground, and then all that stuff is ejected high into the sky, and then it rains back down in these teardrop shaped glassy green stones. And so we'd be looking for those. So yeah, Southeast Asia quite a bit, and then later on to the Empty Quarter in Oman. So yeah, I definitely would have to credit my father for instilling that travel bug, along with National Geographic and looking through those pages.
I feel like travel as a young kid, I was lucky enough to travel a lot around the United States, but never really internationally as a kid. And my wife and I actually moved to Costa Rica and lived there for a year when I was like 30 and 31. And it was such a formative experience at age 31. And it's just Costa Rica. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's not that different in the U.S., but it's to see the U.S. from the outside in. I feel like that is a very, very important thing that I hope I can instill in my little girls, because I think just being able to get outside and look from the outside in and then see how Americans are kind of treated in other parts of the world. I think that's such a important perspective shift that I didn't get until, 3 decades in. And I think you obviously had it from the beginning. I think it really influences worldview and compassion and empathy, I think. Do you agree?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it shows you that there are so many different ways to live this life, and they're all equally valid on their own.
You ended up going, if my internet stalking is correct, ended up going to Savannah College of Art and Design, which is a big deal. I mean, talk about kind of getting the portfolio and the application and getting lined up enough to be accepted into such a amazing program. What was that like?
Well, it was a really big deal for me because I had no way of paying for college, university, and my plan was to enroll in the armed services in the Army, and I was pretty far down that path, so that I could then go on a what is it called?
Yeah, I think it's GI. Is it GI Bill?
Yeah, the GI Bill. A day or two before my official enrollment into the Army, I got a letter from the Savannah College of Art and Design saying that they would pay for my tuition.
Wow.
A full ride. And so that was, man, my life would have been so much different, right? But yeah, that was my ticket out, essentially. I'd never been to Savannah. Went to Savannah with 2 suitcases and really didn't look back for quite a while, not until 2015, and just kind of ejected from this life I had known, and everything that came with it, from my spirituality and everything else, just the rural lifestyle, into a very diverse place with people, other students from all over the world. And gosh, I'd not known any Black people up until that time either. It was, and here I had an awesome Black roommate, and all of these things that I'd been raised with were challenged very immediately in that transition, moving to Savannah. And it was kind of like this big awakening for me. And I grew a lot in that first year, made a lot of mistakes too. But yeah, it was life-changing. My parents, they really wanted me to go to engineering school. Mm-hmm. And be an engineer, classic Asian mom. My dad wanted that for me too. In fact, he still sends me opportunities for engineering courses and classes. He still thinks I should go down that road. And I'm still making a mistake in this life of photography. I'll never make money, but so far, so good.
Yeah, you're making
been
it
really,
happen.
Really fortunate to have been able to, gosh, I think I'm 10 or 12 years into this practice now on my own as a photographer. And it's been awesome.
Well, it's a hard road and a challenging road no matter what. And then having that that pressure from your folks to do otherwise. I think about, I've not had him on the podcast. We have mutual friends, Jimmy Chin, who, he grew up with both parents very Asian and wanting him to either be a lawyer or a doctor, and he just kind of said, "Well, I want to try something. I want to try something else." Totally. And I love those stories.
About that. Yeah.
Y'all talked about that before.
Yeah. That pressure and how that somehow never quite goes away, no matter like what heights you achieve or what dreams you reach. It's funny. It's like they're pretty stubborn and and their vision of what a productive life looks like. But I didn't fully answer your question in terms of like what it looked like, getting everything prepared for SCAD. And I really have to credit my 2 high school art teachers who really pushed me and saw something in me to pursue art and photography as well as a photo mentor that I had in Fort Collins named Cole Thompson, who's an incredible black and white photographer, still making gorgeous pictures today. But those three people really saw something in me and really encouraged me to pursue the art direction. And I'm so glad I did.
So culturally, obviously, it was a big change and a big awakening, but it sounds like you were, in a lot of ways, kind of a lone wolf artistically as well when you were growing up. What was that like, just kind of being surrounded by so many top-notch creative minds? I mean, like how did that affect your outlook on your work and what you wanted to do? I mean, we could talk for 3 hours about this, I'm sure, but I'd love to know how it was just kind of going from figuring it out on your own, taking a picture or two a day, to just being immersed in one of the most creative ecosystems you can find in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, and I tell this to kids that are in school right now. The greatest thing that you get from being at university is the crowd that you're in and the people that are around you and the friendships that you form. And like that for me has served me so much to this day. I mean, you build such an incredible community, and especially starting out in New York City as a photo assistant, trading jobs back and forth with other, former peers at school, now colleagues. And really, without those friendships and that whole network that I got from SCAD, I wouldn't have made it, and a lot of those people are still just so close in my life. And then, of course, just like being this whole ecosystem of ideas and chasing down new approaches to how to live a life in photography. SCAD changed my mind in terms of like, it took me off the track of wanting to be a photojournalist and a war photographer and a Nat Geo photographer, to wanting to be a celebrity and portrait fashion photographer. And that's what I pursued when I then moved to New York City as a photo assistant, was to work for those heroes of mine that were doing that.
Can you talk about that? So you graduate. How long is that program? Is it 4 years?
It's a 4-year program that I finished in 3, just because I was eager to continue on and get on with my life. Plus, being a student is expensive. Even though I had a full ride, I still had to pay for housing and all that stuff. But yeah, I was ready to get on with it. So I finished in 3, moved to Brooklyn with 4 of my closest friends, and joined a group of other SCAD grads that maybe 60 or 80 strong in total. And gosh, we would hang out all the time. It was awesome. And again, going back to that community of just helping one another. And so when I first got to New York, I was interning for Annie Leibovitz, the portrait photographer.
That's unbelievable, man. I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was, it was tough. I mean, you're really just a grunt as an intern, cleaning bathrooms, emptying trash cans at night after everyone leaves, not getting paid either. And as someone without any money, that was really hard, the not getting paid part. So then finding a way to make bucks outside of the full-time internship became, the quest. But yeah, I mean, it was a huge learning experience, that internship. After everyone would leave, just looking through job binders and seeing how jobs were billed and how you price things out, and just the business side of photography too, was really important. Probably not a great thing for me to share to a wide audience that I would do that, but I had to find the value and worth outside of money working for Annie in the beginning. But being an intern was great. I got to meet photo assistants that once my internship was finished, I could plug into the greater New York City photo assistant network and start getting jobs. And then after a while, I returned to Annie's as a freelance photo assistant and would work on jobs for a number of years with her, as well as other photographers. I ended up for a period full-time with Mark Seliger, another big portrait photography celebrity photographer. And it was a really exciting lifestyle. I mean, you're going back and forth from New York to LA a couple times a week. You're going to other cities around the country and the world all the time, just racking up miles, never sleeping, meeting insane people just all the time and getting to spend time with them. Just like every celebrity you can think of, world leaders, just like, wow, what an experience. And the parties too, just like, with models and it was just like, it was an insane way to like spend my 20s. And I did that for almost 10 years, photo assisting and working for photographers, and got to work for every hero of mine that I set out to work for when I left SCAD, except for Philip Lorca de Corsia. I stalked him for the longest time too. I found his office, and he was in the same building as this other photographer I worked for, the fantastic Martin Scholler, another just really incredible portrait photographer. And Philip Lorca de Corsia's office was in the same building, and I would leave letters and slide them under his door. He was never there. There's always a pile of mail outside his door, and I'd send him an email once a month, and I did that for over a year until finally I got a letter back from him just saying, like, I don't really shoot much anymore. I'm focused on teaching, and I appreciate your persistence, but there's no need here. So he's the one that escaped me. But other than him, I got to learn so much about how to do things, how not to do things, how to treat people, how not to treat people, and the business, and how to relate to subjects, and how to break that ice, especially when you only have 20 minutes with a famous person. And all of that has translated just immeasurably into my practice, just that conglomerate of experiences with all these different people and how they approach photography.
Was there ever any moments when you went to school and the next thing you know, you're in New York and you're in the middle of, just the epicenter of big time photography? Was there ever a point when you were kind of like, oh man, this is, because you're depending on it for money. It's a job. It's not just a fun artistic endeavor. I mean, it is, but there's the money side of it. Was there ever any point when you're like, oh man, I don't know if I've chosen the right thing, or this is a lot harder than I thought? I mean, any wavering at all in those early years about whether or not you'd made the right choice, or it sounds like you were just kind of all in from the beginning?
No wavering. I mean, it was not easy. Let's be very clear. I had, I was not one of these rich kids that could, that world is full of people that come from wealth and they have the luxury of not needing to make money when they do these things. Mm-hmm. That was obviously not the case for me. Rent's high, food's expensive. So I found a lot of workarounds. I hustled, would take jobs at any and all hours of the day, try to stack them as much as I could. I would bring Tupperware to set and take home, fill them on the sly and take them home and freeze them. And that's how I ate. I just ate frozen meals from set. Just trying to find every way to keep expenses down. So especially in the early days, so I could just keep working for photographers for free, which I think is just so incredibly predatory, especially when you're Annie Leibovitz,
Yeah.
That's just unethical.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not in the business, but when I hear that, I think I kind of had a similar thought.
When you command a day rate of $200,000 a day, and you're not paying your people, and, then come to find out when you look through the job binders, how much they're actually billing you for, sometimes $500 a day at the time. It's disheartening, and it's predatory, and that needs to stop. And I think largely it has, but yeah, it's kind of it was kind of a cruel world in some ways.
So at what point did you start, you were gathering all this great experience, building this great network, learning the business. How was your own personal business developing? And I mean, were you, thinking about, all right, I'm going to leave New York in this many years, or like, how did it kind of shift from you assisting others to you doing your own thing and creating your own business?
Well, that's the thing, Ed. It wasn't developing in the ways of like my personal practice. I was absorbing all these things, learning light techniques and everything else we've talked about, which in a way is development, I suppose. But I wasn't making photographs for myself other than, I've done this thing for a long, long time where I take a Polaroid a day, and I have all these probably over 100 now journals of just like, they're just little bookmarks for each day of my life to kind of remind me of what was going on then. And so other than those photographs, I wasn't doing anything for myself. And that really grew. The weight of not doing things for myself grew and grew and grew until it became kind of unsurmountable. And in 2015, I knew I needed to do something about that, and I knew I needed to find a way to quit cold turkey, this assisting life. And at that point, those years of assisting, we're starting to take a toll. It's just too many too many long days and not enough sleep and too much partying and everything else, that I knew I needed to quit. And I knew I needed to make a statement through my own work. And how I did that was following the advice of my high school photo teacher, Rick Ney, which was photograph what you know. And so I went home, I went back to Colorado and wanted to reconnect with my family out on the plains. And I spent the better part of the summer of 2015 with them during wheat harvest. And it ended up being just like kind of one of these tremendous harvest seasons where there's just so much drama. I mean, the spring had so much rain, the early summer had so much rain, and the fields were just heavy. I mean, it's all dryland wheat, so there's no irrigation. And we're looking at like, 100 bushels an acre, which is just insane for dryland wheat, where normally, 40's good. 100's kind of unheard of, but at the same time, it was just incredibly stormy. Hail all around and supercells and the threat of tornadoes or big winds blow down the wheat, especially since it's so heavy and the fields were so muddy, we couldn't get into them. And so there's just so much tension and waiting for the fields to dry out so we can get in there and hopefully not lose it all to hail. And I was making pictures during that time, and it's still one of my favorite bodies of work, that time reconnecting with my family and weaving in my experiences with Christianity throughout that, all this symbolism. It was a special time, and we did end up getting the wheat in, and it was just an incredible bumper crop. But that body of work called The Reckoning Days was something I could stand on and start submitting to contests and to magazines, and just to start getting my name out there and as something just to propel me into the next project. And I used that work to create a pitch for Carhartt, because I was thinking, what are the commercial clients out there that I could work for and really kind of bring a voice to. And again, thinking about my high school teacher's advice, like, this is a brand that I know really well. I've worn Carhartt pants and shirts and jackets my whole life.
Yep.
And so I called 1-800 Carhartt once I had my deck done, and the receptionist answered, and I was like, "Hey, could I please get the email address for the creative director?" And she's like, "No, I can't just give that out." And I was like, "Oh, all right. Well, how about a art director or an art buyer, And she's like, "Yeah, no, I can't." I was like, how about your email address? She's like, "Why would you want my email address?" I'm like, "Well, you never know." So she gave me her email address, but then, this is the days before LinkedIn and stuff, where you could find email addresses easier. I then had like the format, how Carhartt would break down a name into an email address. And then so I plugged in Brian Bennett and Ron Harper's names, creative director, senior art director, into that format and fired off my deck. And I was shocked to get a phone call less than a week later from Brian Bennett, creative director of Carhartt, saying like, "Hey, love your work. I see something in this. What do you think about us sending you some boxes of clothing and $10,000, and you do your thing and take some pictures, and we'll go from there." And I was just like, "Wow, holy crap, $10,000 and this opportunity,
awesome.
That's amazing." And I credit every chance I can this life, this wonderful life in photography I've been able to live, to Carhartt and to Brian Bennett and to Ron Harper, because it has given me the financial security to pursue this life and to do my personal projects, and to follow these threads that I believe in and I feel like are important. And without that financial security of a couple jobs a year, which I still am doing for them, I wouldn't be able to do this, and I wouldn't have had this life. And so it was really like, that was the big break for me, was getting Carhartt by my side. And they have been so supportive of my projects too throughout the years. It's just been a wonderful relationship. We've really developed an awesome way of approaching a commercial photo shoot, where we always work with people that are doing a job that they're proud of and telling their story. So each campaign we treat as an homage to like the consumer that buys Carhartt and all the work that Carhartt, supports through their clothing in a way that they outfit. It's just been, that was huge for me. That was huge.
Well, so what kind of the feeling of satisfaction, how did that differ? Being out there, on the ground with these people that are working so hard, telling their stories, getting, this important work they're doing, broadcasting it out to a larger audience, versus working in the world of portraits for celebrities. I feel like there's obviously a need for that.
Towards the end of my assisting, I, through Martin Scholler, the portrait photographer I was telling you about, he introduced me to Robert Clark. And Robert, according to Robert, he has shot more features for National Geographic than anyone else. Okay. I haven't confirmed if this is true or not, but if it's not true, it's close to being true. Because this man has shot for that magazine for decades, and someone I certainly grew up looking at his pictures, and he needed an assistant. And so for 2.5 years, between working all these other celebrity shoots and stuff, I would go on these awesome long-winded adventures to a far-flung corner of the globe with Robert. And he really became my mentor, and taught me how to see in a way that other people hadn't. And we became really close. In terms of the magazine career, and this is before the Reckoning days, another big break I had was in South Africa with Robert Clark. We were on an expedition with Lee Berger for a number of weeks, looking for a new early human ancestor, and deep in a squeeze cave system called Rising Star. And we found it.
Wow.
It was incredible. And the incredible thing for me was that Robert couldn't fit past a certain feature called the Superman squeeze, where you kind of have to like wiggle in a Superman position with one arm forward, one arm behind for 100 feet. Well underground. You're just kind of pushing yourself along and just wiggling like a worm. He couldn't go any further past that. And into the chamber where these discoveries were made. And so I got to take all those pictures, and not only did we find one specimen, like entire lineages of early humans can be described by just like one ear bone, like one ear ossicle, right? Like the Denosovans, we have one ear ossicle. And for Homo naledi, which is what it ended up being called, like not only do we have a full specimen with every bone from the body perfectly preserved, they don't even look like fossils, and they're nearly 1 million years old, or 500,000. I'd have to fact check that one. I can't remember now. But we had 17 of them, and from infant to elderly, and we had this whole array. It was just, to this day, the richest early human discovery, and this missing link between modern day humans and modern day bonobos, where the feet are anatomically, identical to human feet. And then the hands are identical to modern bonobos. And so these were like bipedal tree climbing early ancestors of ours that may have had some type of culture, because these bodies were placed in a way that suggested ritual. And, back then there must have been an entrance that was much closer to the surface, much easier to access than what we were dealing with, multiple hours to get to this chamber.
That's crazy.
Yeah. What's crazier too is that there was a cave in where both my feet were broken and my hand was split. And we thought I had a broken femur at first. This big stalactite came off the ceiling and hit me. It must have been in 700-800 pounds. The effort to get out was probably like the single largest physical effort of my life to try to get out while I still had that adrenaline before the swelling in my feet kicked in. Because there's no rescue when you're in a squeeze cave system. You have to get yourself out. There's no room to help, So yeah, thankfully I was able to get to the surface. And then I got blood poisoning, which sucked. I went into septic shock. My blood was filled with bacteria from the cave. And so I had to get a full blood transfusion in rural South Africa, which presented a whole lot of other concerns. But it resulted in, my first pictures in National Geographic and the print magazine with my name on it, which just blew my mind. And it also just made me realize okay, this dream is possible. And this is a good first step towards achieving that. And let's just build on that. And so that's what really kind of gave me the confidence to stop assisting, go home and shoot the Reckoning Days.
That is a hardcore. I mean, all the work you did to get in the position to even go on the trip, and then the physical and mental fortitude it took to push through that. Is that the scariest kind of, oh shit, I might die type experience you've ever had?
I felt pretty calm through that one. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to die. I mean, at the time in the cave, I didn't know about the whole blood poisoning situation. I guess if I had known that, I just knew that, as we were going down into the cave that day too, the caving crews, God, they're just incredible people and physically gifted and small, and they can dislocate all these joints and stuff. And they're just flying way ahead of me. And I'm just trying to keep up. I can't see their lights, but I can hear their voices, and they'd yell back at me here and there, don't end up like our friend in Canada. He's in week 3 of his 6-week residency down in a cave because he broke his tibia, and he just has to wait for it to heal, and so there's a group of cavers that twice a week bring him in food, water, and porn just so he can pass the time. And so as I was laying there injured in shock on the ground in the chamber, I was like, okay, 6 weeks, here we go. And I was like, well, this will be an interesting life experience. I don't think I was ever, I wasn't really scared. But I have been very scared, before.
Any jumping way ahead, are you ever going to write a book about all these adventures?
Maybe when I finally break something that's broken for a while and I'm sitting still in one place. Yeah, it could be fun, but I don't know.
That's a crazy. That is crazy. And then, do you ever? How often do you have these moments where you just kind of stop, if you ever do, and just I can't believe I'm living this life?
Oh, every day, Ed. Yeah, every day I'm making coffee. I'm in my house here in this insane place where I live now, and look out at Grand Staircase Escalante and these 600-foot cliffs just rising out in front of my view, unobstructed, just enveloping the property, and just wow. Yeah, no, it's every day. Even New York assisting days, wow, I can't believe I'm in New York City living in this crappy apartment. It's so great. Yeah, it doesn't escape me. even just on an hourly basis. It's so awesome.
That gratitude piece, I don't care what you're doing in life. I think that is a huge component of happy, productive people is people who can be both happy and productive. I feel like that gratitude is amazing.
Yeah, living my dream.
It seems like it, man. It seems like you're just loving it. You're working extremely hard. You're very, obviously the art speaks for itself, but the whole business side and the professionalism that you bring to both whether it's journalism, whether it's your personal projects, whether it's working with brands, I think that professionalism is huge. But thinking about personal type projects, I think one thing that you're known for that I've really picked up on and I've noticed is these really long-term projects that you engage in, years-long projects. And so I'm curious, one, when did that start? And two, how do you even go about finding something that you feel comfortable will capture your attention and enthusiasm for years on end?
Yeah, I mean, it started from the beginning. Maybe I'm just a slow person, I think that could be it. I've never been the fastest learner.
Uh-huh. That's a gift. That's a gift, I think. I'm the same way, but you've done a lot more with it than I have.
Yeah. This sponge takes a while to absorb. But no, I mean, if I'm going to say something and make work derivative off of that, I want to make sure that it is based on as much information as possible, as much experience as possible, and from every angle, that I can find. It's really important to get things right, and in order for me to make something that I feel proud of, it just needs that gestational time, to grow and to not rush things.
When was the first, when was the first kind of official project that you did like that?
That I did like that. I mean, well, you could say the Reckoning Days is like that. It's a sum total of my childhood and growing up and all those experiences. And so going into the next big project, which was American Backyard, about the U.S.-Mexico border, I knew I wanted to replicate that depth of knowledge and experience and emotional connection. But obviously I couldn't spend, a whole nother lifetime of experience to do that. But I figured that maybe a couple years would be enough. And so, yeah, for that project, and with every project, it's about just diving in and immersing myself. And it also means that you're working on multiple ideas at once. And it's good to bounce back and forth when you're feeling like super saturated with one subject and sometimes it's heavy. It's good to just bounce away and dive back into the other bucket. And so there are always, at any given point in time in my practice, there are at least a dozen different threads that I'm pulling on. And that's the pool of ideas or topics that will then, hopefully maybe one or two of them will grow into the next big thing. And so right now I'm kind of in this weird in between, where I've just finished 2 multi-year projects and I'm in the stage of looking back through this bucket of ideas that I have that I've been nurturing for the last couple of years and seeing which one or which two will, hold my interest enough to sustain me for the next 2 or 3 years, because that's going to be really important. I never want to be in a position where after a year of working on a topic, I'm like, you know what, I'm bored of this. And also out of those ideas, where can I add to the conversation, or where can I help build conversation and have the most amount of impact? Whether if it's impact for the conversation in general and bringing more awareness, or immediate impact for a community that I care about. I guess that's the decision-making process behind it.
One of the things that I really admire about your work and your approach, and I think it's more important these days than it ever has been, is your curiosity and open-mindedness, and and it's really deep, authentic curiosity. And in a lot of your work, or all of it really, that you're you're interacting with humans, and there's this, the human element of where humans meet these landscapes that you're working on and these borders and all this kind of stuff. And there was I found an article online where you were talking about an interaction you had with a rancher. I think he was like a 4th generation rancher in Arizona named
John Ladd.
Could you tell that story? Because I think that is such a case study in the way you go about things, and something that I need to replicate more of.
Well, yeah, I mean, I will tell that story, and I will also just say that I benefit from having grown up in 2 worlds, right? Like, I'm half Asian and Taiwanese and half like rural Westerner, from completely different ideologies. And so what I perceived as a kid I perceived as a detriment was just like, feeling ungrounded and just kind of floating and lacking this sense of belonging to anywhere. I wasn't enough American. I wasn't enough Chinese for either side of my family. But now I realize that as a strength, because I can almost be this like interpreter, or I have an understanding, can speak to multiple different types of communities. And in this situation, Arizona, is during American Backyard. We were months into the project, my wife and I, and now wife, girlfriend at the time. And our plan, our goal, which is what we ended up achieving, was to drive and experience every inch of the U.S. side of the border from Brownsville to the Pacific Ocean along the actual border fence. And that took a lot of negotiating with Customs and Border Patrol to get the access to do that in the wake of Trump's inauguration. So we started at Trump's inauguration, and then we headed to Brownsville. And so a couple months in, 3 months in at this point, we're in Arizona and doing our thing, every day, just getting pulled over 6, 7, 8 times a day by Border Patrol, having to explain what we're doing, and then eventually having a name drop, the chief communications director for the agency, which thank goodness believed in my idea. And I was able to, establish a great relationship with him in the beginning. And they'd always be so skeptical of like, okay, you're going to name drop him. And then, after 30 minutes, like, okay, yeah, he's legit. All right. And so we were used to getting rolled up on all hot and aggressive by Border Patrol. But in this instance, and this was really one of the few instances where it was just a citizen coming up hot on us, and he gets out of his truck, border fence running east-west right there, hot day. And he's like, mind telling me what the hell you're doing on my property? And I was like, hey, how's it going? And he's got his hand on his hip, hand on the gun, and he unholsters it, doesn't point it at me or anything, but he's got a gun in his hand, that's enough. And he seems very angry.
Yeah.
But just de-escalating, right? Just like, hey, don't mean to bother you or alarm you or disturb you. Just we're working on this project, and are you John Ladd, by the way? He's like, yes. I'm like, well, I've been trying to get a hold of you, because he's like, at the time he was on Fox News quite a bit, very outspoken against the migrant problem, as he would describe it, and just finding ways of connecting, and whether if it's just on the weather, or like, where's the closest good burrito? That was always a good one, especially with Border Patrol. To just like establish the fact in this situation that we're both just, good-natured humans living our lives, and finding that common ground on the human level, in order to proceed.
How have you what is your, I know there's not a technique or like a life hack or whatever they want to call it, but like, I'm from North Carolina originally. I got the Southern accent. And whenever I've had that same situation happen where ranchers have come up holding guns, not pointing them at me, but they're in their hands. What are you doing? And it's kind of breaking through that initial, that's an extreme example, but just in general, I've found that being genuinely curious about these people's lives and like, I don't know anything about what you're doing. I want to know. And I found that breaks down barriers, and you can see each other as humans versus ideas. I mean, is that something that's worked for you? This kind of real curiosity about why these people are doing what they're doing, what makes them tick, their family history, the whole deal.
Totally. Being genuinely curious, speaking slowly in an uncomplicated way, and smiling with your eyes, smiling with your eyes is just such a, if there's a life hack, maybe it's that. Listen and smile with your eyes. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Just be polite and be decent.
Well, I feel like once you get to know folks of all, across political spectrum, socioeconomic spectrums, you know them as people, and then you can really understand that they have good intent. You may not agree with them, but you can assume good intent, and they can assume good intent about you. And I feel like that's what the internet takes away, is everybody thinks everybody has bad intent. But when you look somebody in the eye and talk to them for an hour and a half, it's hard to not see them as a human who's just trying their best.
Well, that's the thing, and that's the thing that I'm always preaching with everyone, whether if it's a working cowboy at a bar in Sheridan or, a quote unquote liberal elite, like a high powered lawyer in New York City at another bar. Is that, at the end of the day, we want 99% of the same things, and yet we choose to focus on the 1% where we disagree. And I think it's just such a loss for this country to be fixated on that difference. And while those differences are important, I think the commonality and our shared values as an American, largely are just so much more important. And yeah, we need to find ways to have conversation again, because at the end of the day, most folks are decent and they have values and morals, and are not defined by who they voted for in the last election.
I agree. 100%. 100%. What big news for you over the last few months was your cover story in Time magazine, and congrats. Awesome work. I mean, what an amazing piece of work. And so you did the photos and you wrote the story. Can you talk about the experience of that versus, I know you've done that, but you've also written, or you've taken the photos and other journalists have written the story. I'd love to hear about that process of kind of doing it all and kind of what you learned from that.
When you spend so much time on one idea and immersed in these communities, building relationships, it's a little bit nerve-wracking and sometimes heartbreaking when you then hand all that reporting and material and connection over to a writer who has a day or two to put words to, that whole bag of soup of emotions and feelings and facts. And so in this instance, I was so close with the subject. I'd spent so much time on it. I even went back to school for a year to learn about tribal water and to learn about water law in the West and all the different conflicts, to learn
was
about
that your Scripps fellowship?
Yeah, it was through a fellowship through the Center for Environmental Journalism called the Ted Scripps Fellowship. And it's just such an amazing opportunity. And for any of you journalists out there that are listening to this and have any sort of environmental bent, reporting on the environment, I would look into this program because it's such a gift. I'll just make this plug quick, but it's $80,000 to go to school for 2 semesters. No concrete deliverables. You're just working on an idea, on a project, take whatever classes you want, and that's it. And you get $80,000 and all of these resources. It's such a gift. It's such a rare gift in life to be able to do that. But yeah, so after doing that and after spending a year in the field supported by the Center for Contemporary Documentation, which paid for my time to be out there in the field, paid for all those hundreds of rolls of medium format film. I mean, just huge expenses. I wouldn't have been able to do this project without that support from the center and from Alice Gabriner, this incredible photo editor director who's now working for them. After all of that, I just couldn't imagine handing all this off to a person that, Time was like, well, they'll probably have a day in the field. And I'm like, for everyone that knows the West, you understand how big these distances are. And even just to like drive across the Navajo Nation, which is the size of West Virginia, largest reservation in the United States, it takes a day, you know? So like, how can you even begin to like get into the meat when you only have a day? And so, yeah, I thought a lot about it, and then just kind of put myself out there as like, you know, what are your thoughts on me taking a crack at writing this? You know, I've never written at this level, at the time level. But I think I should try. And so my first draft was 9,000 words. I felt really proud of it. And they're like, well, this is great. Honestly, it is. But, 9,000 words, we're a general interest magazine. You could run a long story, 4,000 words maybe, but then you'll have room for just a couple photographs. So it's really up to you of like what you want to achieve with this story. And with time, I figured it'd be important to, give priority to the photographs and to keep the story minimal. So, through the editing process, working with a fantastic editor, Carl Vick, by the way, I lost my voice in it. There's a lot less of that personal experience, and it's just more focused on the facts at hand, the issue, which is what Time is all about. And that's their strength. So my goal is to publish a longer version, with the longer written account and more photographs somewhere else. I'm looking for grants to publish a book on the project as well.
Again, it just goes back to your willingness to put yourself out there and ask the question. I think a lot of people are so scared of being rejected, myself included, that they get scared to do it. And I love that you did. What was the response from all the amazing people you got to know over the course of that project to the final product?
It was overwhelming. It was more than I expected. And it was such a relief too.
Yeah,
just like it's such a acrimonious topic in the West, water in general. And then when you mix in indigenous history and experience, especially like not being of that community, it's terrifying. Being an outsider and sharing stories that aren't my own is always a scary thing. So much responsibility involved. And I was just so relieved to hear that, Navajo Nation across the board, folks were just so excited about the story, getting this issue out into the world, making people aware. But in some ways I was more nervous about Washington County, which is the other side of the paradigm. And I'll kind of share a summary of the story here in a second, but because, by and large, they've been treated as the villains in the issue where, they use all this water and they pay so little for it, and they have all these resources in order to build infrastructure, that they have been villainized in a lot of media outlets. I mean, John Oliver did a whole story about this water in the West writ large kind of issue. And one of his main points of attack was this guy named Zach Renstrom, who is the water leader of Washington County. And even I got a letter from Zach just, saying like, hey man, this is great. Thank you so much for treating this fairly. I think it's really important for people to know what's happening on Navajo Nation and how unacceptable that is. And he's like, honestly, this is the kind of press we need, because it puts it he's like, without public pressure for me to do something different, I can't do that something different, because I have to serve what my constituents want. And if my constituents want us to conserve water, and if they want us to find other ways to reduce our consumption and are okay with the price increasing in order to, fund these really expensive conservation projects, whether if it's recycling or other things, I need that public pressure in order to do that. And I wasn't expecting that kind of note from a person like Zach Renstrom. So it was a relief, and it was more positive than I expected, from both sides.
You did, not that you need my approval, but before I went all in on this podcast, I was a conservation director at a conservation group, and I was in charge of this water project and did a lot of fundraising. And I just found that talking about water in a way that does not brush over the details, but is also entertaining and people don't glaze over. It is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Figure out,
it gets wonky quick. Yes.
Real quick and real. I mean, I would be on calls with these water lawyers and I would just glaze over because it was all so over my head and kind of boring. And so figuring out how do you tell the story in a way that resonates with people, but keeps all the facts in there and shows the complexity of it. And I felt like even just the structure of comparing Navajo Nation to Washington County, like all of it was great. And I learned so much. I mean, I feel like I'm pretty plugged into that world and I learned a ton from it. And so, again, you don't need my approval, but thank you. I say thank you because I learned so much from it. And I can't imagine how hard that was to get that done. I mean, it's quite an accomplishment.
I mean, there are certainly days where you're just like, what am I doing? This is know your place, Elliot. Like this, what am I even doing out here? I'm spinning my wheels. People aren't calling me back. There's pressure from the funders to deliver. It's not always, you don't always feel good about it. But yeah, to back up a little bit, just for those that aren't familiar with the question of balance, it's a tale of two places, essentially. Yeah, so I was working on another project called Geography of Hope, which is about Glen Canyon. And in this era of the mega drought that the West is enduring, that started in the year 2000, driest times, right, since the year 800 AD, which is just kind of so hard to wrap your mind around. But we know because of dendrochronology from tree rings that we are in our driest times in 1200 years. And as a result of that, but also of just like mismanagement dating back to the 1922 Colorado River Compact and how water is managed in the West, Lake Powell did drop to record lows. And when that happened, at the height of Lake Powell's decline, 108,000 acres of Glen Canyon was out from under the water. This incredible beating heart of the Colorado Plateau, the center of our Western hydrology, was flooded with the creation of Glen Canyon Dam. And since 1970, we've lost this place. Glen Canyon is a bit of a misnomer. It's more than just one canyon. You got the main stem of the Colorado River for 186 miles and roughly 125 tributary canyons, each with their own massive networks of washes and arroyos and other side canyons. And so it's just this incredibly intricate place that from the air, from space, looks like the human capillary network, right? This is all these branches. And so unlike Lake Mead behind Hoover Dam, this is just a very, very, very complex landscape that was lost. And we knew very little about this place. I mean, there weren't any ecological studies done. There was like a rushed archaeological survey that found thousands of sites, before it was then, immediately lost as the waters were rising. And so this was an opportunity to see this place. So it kind of just started off as just like pure curiosity of like, wow, this is a landscape that I am just falling head over heels for, that people haven't seen since, old times, since, ancestral Puebloans and some Diné have walked through. It's really kind of uncharted territory. I mean, the Escalante River was the last river discovered in the lower 48, which is a part of Glen Canyon. The Henry Mountains, which bound the west side of Glen Canyon, were the last mapped mountains in the lower 48. Just an incredibly rural place, an opportunity to see this new landscape. And what I found was just this incredible resurgence of native flora and fauna. And as I'm working on this project for 3 years in Glen Canyon, I got to meet all these incredible people, including a lot of Diné Navajo individuals, a lot of, river guides, and became close friends with them. And they're like, this is all great, but you should also look into the water situation on Navajo Nation. A third of us live without running water. We haul water. It's really expensive. And it's something that holds us down as a people from succeeding in life. And so I was like, okay. So I kind of just, pegged that in my brain and started looking more into that. And then maybe 6 months later, just learning more about the water issues in the West, I learned that like, oh, whoa, Washington County, Utah, this arid, dry place in the southwest corner of the state where St. George is, and other communities, they use the most amount of water per person in the country, at least up until recently. And they pay the least for that water in the whole nation. Like, how can that be? They're 80 miles away as the raven flies from the Navajo Nation, where the opposite is true, where, like I said, a third live without running water, and they use, on average, the Dene use the least amount of water per person in the country at 5 gallons a day versus up until recently, Washington County's 300 gallons a day. And for the water that they do get, they pay by far the most in the country for that water, because they're having to spend all of this time to drive from their, it's a very remote place, spread out place, to drive to a water source, pump from either a spring or wait in line for 2 or 3 hours for a garden spigot in a town, these long lines to then, just imagine like one garden spigot supplying a couple hundred people with their drinking water. And then there's not a whole lot of flow from a garden spigot. And then waiting 30, 40 minutes for your 300-gallon tank in the back of your truck to fill up. And then driving all the way back and all the fuel that consumes. And then in the summer, having to do that 2, 3, 4 times a week because you have livestock that also need water. It is just such a huge detriment, just all that time and resource off the top taken away from your productive life, right? And so once I realized that there was that such immediate contrast and such a small distance in the West, I felt like I needed to know more, and that other people needed to know more. And what's the history behind this? Like, why did this happen? And what's the human cost of this? And it's especially important to have that conversation now, because the 7 Colorado River Basin states and the federal government and the tribes and all the different stakeholders are negotiating the post-2026 interim guidelines, which is a very unsexy name for the largest revision to how we use water in the West since 1922. And it's been promised over and over that the tribes are going to have a seat at the table, even though that seat hasn't been defined. Like, what does that even mean? And that these racial disparities in water access are going to be addressed. And, the history of the indigenous experience since Anglo showed up has been one of broken promises, that I feel like it's just so important to have this conversation in the center of the debate while, these negotiations are taking place. And the only way that accountability can take place is through public awareness and pressure to hold our leaders to account and make sure those things are addressed, and make sure that they know that we are listening, that we're watching, and that we care about this, and that this needs to be addressed as part of everything else that we're talking about. And we should center these issues of equity within that conversation. So that was really like the motivation behind getting this out there. And in those moments of doubt in the field, thinking about that and like, okay, well, maybe this does matter a little bit if I complete this, like maybe I can just move the needle a little bit. And who knows? It's so hard. And I think that's something that I know a lot of my peers struggle with too. And I certainly do, is just, are we making a difference? I don't know, but we're damn sure going to try, right? We have to try.
Well, and I'm glad to hear you're considering, expanding the project even further. I mean, I think that's about as impactful as anybody could ever hope, with Time Magazine, with such a substantive yet entertaining story, with such beautiful photographs. And
who reads anymore though, Ed,
Me, I do.
Yes. Okay. Thank goodness. One person.
No, and for people, I've spoken with a bunch of people on the podcast about kind of topics tangentially related to this. Like I had Lorelei Cloud, who's the vice chairwoman of the Southern Ute tribe. She's awesome. And then Mike Dehoff, who I'm sure you know.
Oh yeah, we're close friends, and he was such
man, what a cool dude,
huge supporter. I love that episode, by the way. Everyone should listen to it.
I appreciate you listening. I'm sorry you had to listen to my voice, but I'm glad you got to hear Mike's.
I wouldn't have been able to create Geography of Hope, this Glen Canyon project, without DeHoff and without Eric Balkan at Glen Canyon Institute. I mean, they were just huge supporters.
Well, it seems like you have a lot of supporters, and I know that doesn't happen. I mean, they're fans of you and your work. Random question that I wanted to ask you. Do you carry the Desiderata around in your pocket?
How do you know about this? Yes, I do.
I do top-notch research.
It's in my pocket right now.
Is it really?
Out looking at it. Yeah.
Tell me about it. Tell me about that.
In it every day.
Every day,
it's just, it's this creed that I live by. This man named Max Ehrman back in 1927 wrote this poem that's essentially just a good reminder of how to live life in balance with yourself and with others. It's a calming thing for me to have, especially in moments of crisis or stress, just to read through these however many stanzas.
My wife quotes that often,
really?
Particularly. Yeah, she does. She really does. And I that's how I came to it. And
that's cool.
I might need to start carrying around in my pocket to get some of your energy. There was a quote, I think one of the quotes that said, one of the lines, speak your truth quietly and clearly and listen to others, even to the dull and the ignorant. They too have their story.
Yeah, that's really important to remember. Yeah.
Any other books or resources, films, anything that have played in? I mean, obviously Desiderata is top of the list, but I'd love to know if there are any other books that have played a big role. Not, maybe not in your understanding of water law or conservation or history, but just important books to you.
Oh yeah, I mean, John Steinbeck is a hero. I love his clear, direct way of writing that still has so much art in it. I think East of Eden, The Grapes of Wrath are just timeless masterpieces and just kind of transport you into, I guess, the core of one American identity. I say one because we're a country of multitudes, but Steinbeck for sure. And for when I'm feeling dark, especially just in the last year, I've been listening to a lot of Cormac McCarthy. It's just dark poetry. That there's just so much expression in his writing, and I love driving and listening to those audiobooks. Blood Meridian, All the Pretty Horses, just the Border trilogy. It's just all incredible, and it definitely influences how I write on my own in my own journals. I try to write something every day. But just, the way he sees the world and translates that into words is incredible.
I'm scared to read Cormac McCarthy too much because I'm scared it's just going to put me in such a dark place I won't be able to get out of it.
There's always hope in there too. There's always a little bit of hope in there, a glimmer of through the endurance, something good sometimes happens. Yeah, you're right. Usually not. But that's the world we live in.
No, that's right. I was talking with Alden Schindler, who does a lot of the climate work at Aspen, and he's written a new book, and he's going to come on and talk about the new book soon. But he was talking about the road and how he loved the road, and I was like, man, I'm scared to read it. It might put me in a hole. And he goes, oh, it definitely will put you in a hole for weeks, but you need to read it. That's worth something. Better than being stuck in a cave, right? With broken feet.
Yeah. Next time you're in a cave with broken feet, read The Road, and you'll be in a really dark place.
Instead of porn, they can send you Cormac McCarthy.
No, I think I'd choose something a little bit more uplifting and informational in that situation. I love, I'm lucky to count him as a friend these days, but Craig Childs, love his work. The Secret Knowledge of Water was, what brought me into the fold, just wanting to learn more about water. 4 or 5 years ago, I read that book, and it kind of changed my life in some ways. Just got me so stoked on learning about water, and just all these, every story at the end of the day is a water story in some way, right. And I find that just to be so interesting. And The House of Rain, his book about the Anasazi ancestral Puebloans, whichever terminology you prefer. is just so fascinating too. I mean, he just has such a great way of relaying, pretty fact heavy histories and stories and narratives, in such an engaging way. And another great, audio listen because he reads his own books and I love the way he talks and, it'll just grip you,
So many good books that I have not yet read and need to. My wife read Secret Knowledge of Water. That's what it's called.
Yeah,
it's
so good.
She loved it.
It's so good. You should read it.
She also loves East of Eden. That's one of her favorite books.
Seems like we'd be friends.
Yeah, I know. She's a lot better than me.
Desiderata. I mean, that's pretty obscure for most folks.
Yeah, she loves it. I mean, can quote it every line of it. All right. I've taken so much of your time, but I could keep asking you questions for like 4 more hours. Maybe I will do that at some point. I'm going to show up at your house in Utah and drill you with more questions. But any kind of parting words of wisdom, anything you'd like to leave the listeners with? I mean, there's been so much inspiration and instruction in your life story. I knew it was going to be in depth, but this is far exceeded my already high expectations.
Good, because I was nervous. You've had such incredible guests on your show that are so articulate. Looking at you, Pete McBride.
Pete's
someone that I really admire, and he's been such a source of inspiration for me. And to hear his interview on the show was awesome, and I'm so glad we're friends these days.
He's been so supportive, man. He is. We met many years ago, and he's just gone out of his way to help me out in so many ways. What a great dude. Everybody I've had on here is like that. They say don't meet your heroes. I say no, meet them all. They'll probably be awesome.
Yeah, turns out most of my photo heroes weren't, but that's how it goes sometimes. Parting words. I mean, just look for the best in people. Listen. Just listen.
Elliot, you're the man. I love this. I loved it. I'm so happy. Can I call you a friend? We're friends, right? I'm calling you a friend.
Yes, sir. We can be friends.
All right, man. Well, I just really appreciate it. And I'm excited to hang out in person. But thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Most importantly, for all your work, but for taking the time to talk with me.
And thank you to everyone that, is taking time out of their life to listen to this. Really appreciate it. And I hope I can meet every one of you someday,
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number 1, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number 2, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way, so head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.